All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Uthmeier, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us here today for Animal Law is Everywhere. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded, so if you registered, you're going to receive a copy of the recording and a link to the materials from Zoom within 24 hours. So if you don't see that email, I'm going to drop my email into the chat just in case, so I'll make sure that you get those materials. We'll also be posting a recording on YouTube. I usually, in the description, I will also include the CLE code and a link to the materials as well. And speaking of CLE, this training has been approved by the Florida Bar for one General CLE credit. I'll announce the CLE code towards the end. I will also drop it into the chat. And if for whatever reason I forget, no worries, because I promise it will be on the email that goes out from Zoom, and I will also include it in the YouTube description. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility or the captions, you can reach out to me directly. This training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, or PILS. So if you're not familiar with PILS, I'm going to drop the link to their website into the chat so you can take a look at PILS. You can take a look at the operating committees, at the work groups. We do great work there, so I heavily suggest you take a look at our Public Interest Law section website. So final piece of housekeeping announcements are questions and answers. We have a segment towards the end for questions. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. The Q&A is usually the best option, but we will make sure to address questions towards the end of the presentation. So before I introduce our speaker, I do want to give a quick shout out to Stephanie Lopez with Community Legal Services because she's the one that connected me with Lauryn A, our speaker today. Unfortunately, Stephanie was not able to make it today, but Stephanie, if you're listening to this, thank you so much, and everybody else can thank Stephanie for this webinar today. So now I can go ahead and introduce our speaker. So I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, which is Lauryn Day. Lauryn Day is a senior assistant statewide prosecutor with the Florida Attorney General's office, where she prosecutes complex cases across Florida with a focus on animal cruelty, elder abuse, and exploitation. She also serves as an adjunct professor at Barry University School of Law, teaching trial advocacy and animal law. Previously, she was a prosecutor in the Ninth Judicial Circuit, where she led the animal cruelty unit and handled high-profile cases involving child and animal abuse. Lauren is active nationally and locally, serving on boards and task forces dedicated to prosecution, animal protection, and professionalism. She has received multiple awards for her leadership and advocacy, including the 2025 National Top Animal Defender Award. So, without further ado, I want to pass it over to Lauryn Day. Lauryn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for tuning in. So today we are going to be talking about animal law is everywhere, because it is everywhere indeed. I know that we've already kind of discussed my background, but for me, when I give presentations, it's always really important to have people know a little bit more about me and why I'm qualified to speak on any specific topic. When I attend conferences, trainings, or webinars, I always want to know, like, why is this person, the one that should be teaching me more about this? So as was mentioned, I am a career prosecutor. I'm currently with the Office of Statewide Prosecution. I was previously with the State Attorney's Office in the Ninth Circuit, where I was the chief of the Animal Cruelty Unit. Currently, my cases at Statewide are targeted on statewide racketeering prosecutions involving animal fighting, so dog fighting and rooster fighting, as well as fighting of any other animals. I also do some elder abuse cases and elder fraud type of cases. And I am the leader of the Central Florida Animal Cruelty Task Force, as well as our new statewide animal fighting and sub-task force for dog fighting. So that's kind of been my target right now. As was also mentioned, I am an adjunct professor at Barry School of Law, so I teach animal law. I also teach trial advocacy there. And I'm on the National Animal Cruelty Committee for the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, where we discuss issues that are happening really nationwide and worldwide involving animal law in this area. Before that, a lot of people don't know, before law school, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. So I was actually a veterinary technician. I was a vet tech for about 6 years. I had gotten into law school at NC State and then dropped out and didn't know what else I could do with a Bachelor of Science in Animal Science. which is what my undergraduate degree was in. So my guidance counselor told me, well, you can just go to law school. There's no prereqs for that. Just take the LSAT. So that's what I did. And fortunately, my career has kind of come full circle where I'm able to use the law as well as my love and knowledge and background in animal sciences. I worked as a research associate. I was a histology assistant in the state lab and have a pretty hard science background myself. And of course, the most important experience of all, I am a dog mom. That's my boy Carter there in that picture. He was, I believe, 8 years old in that picture, and he is about to turn 12, but he still looks like that. So he's my all black German Shepherd, 130-pound big baby. And of course, I'm a human mom too. I have to put my son Eli on there because he sometimes, if I go back to watch recordings of my training sessions just to better myself, he'll be like, you didn't mention me. So I have to mention Eli. I'm also a human mom as well. And then my Doberman, Taser, and my Border Collie, Toby, are also on there. Okay, so let's get into it. Animal law is in our daily lives. A lot of times when people think about animal law, they either immediately go to like criminal law, okay, animal cruelty, or they think of PETA, right? The People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Oh, something involving PETA. That's where animal law comes into, but it really is literally in everything that we do in our daily lives. So I'm sure everyone on this webinar, when I do this live and in person, I treat it like jury selection. I'm like, show of hands, because I like things to be interactive. It's harder to do in this setting, but I'm sure all of you on here brushed your teeth today, hopefully. And if you did, regardless of the type of toothpaste that you used, you likely used products that came from animals, right? So I have on the screen here some examples from I believe this is a Crest box of toothpaste where you can see the ingredients on the back, as well as this all natural, which we'll talk about in a moment, bar soap there, and then the Zyrtec liquid gels. All of these products contain things such as sodium tallowate. You see that ingredient often. That is just beef fat. Okay, that's all it is fat from cows. Sometimes it can also include cows, sheep, or goats, but most frequently, products are produced with cow fat. That's the tallowate. You may also see sodium lardate. That is pig fat, right? So when you see that in, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, the very first ingredient is this beef fat in this all natural basis skin soap bar. Any type of liquid gel like the Zyrtec gel capsule, Tylenol gel capsule, rapid release gel capsule, the gelatin itself is an animal byproduct, right? And so some animal somewhere was used and manufactured in a way that we got that product that we use if you take your daily allergy medication or headache medication or something else. And then, like I said, with the toothpaste, you can see here, in some of the other ingredients, glycerin is very popular. Again, you'll see some of those other animal byproducts in a lot of these things. And glycerin is also just animal fat. Glycerin is in a ton of things, just like cellulose and glucose and those other things that we get from plants and animals. So I have to give you a trigger warning that some of the following images that I'm going to show may be a little bit disturbing for people who have never seen them. So I've given that to you. But animals are also in our daily life and entertainment, right? So the circus is a big source of entertainment, at least the circus before 2017, when there were a lot of lawsuits that came against Ringling Brothers in particular. You know, in the top left-hand corner here, we have what the Ringling Brothers' greatest show on earth, as it was called, did with the elephants. It's an amazing trick. And if you went to the circus pre-2017, you would have seen this. You would have seen the lions jumping through the ring of fire, the elephants standing on their heads and standing on each other. It's fascinating. Animals and entertainment is fascinating to us. That's why we like it. But a lot of people consume this type of entertainment without thinking about the law behind it and how it affects animals. Ringling Brothers obviously no longer has animals in their live circus show because of the picture here on the bottom left. So this is a baby elephant doing what they would call the breaking. They would break their spirit because if they could break their spirit, then they could get them to do these cool tricks here on top. There were a number of lawsuits that came forward, a lot of whistleblowers, a lot of undercover activists that recorded hundreds and thousands of hours of footage of what was going on, of all of the animals that were dying in the care of the Ringling Brothers Circus, and therefore, that is why they no longer have live animals in the circus. If you go now, I took my son last year to when they were in town in 2024, and it's basically like Cirque du Soleil. So you're not going to see this picture here on the top left anymore when you go to that specific circus. And a lot of states then decided to start to outlaw certain things to try to target these practices. So, for example, in some states, not Florida, but in some states, the use of bull hooks is illegal. It's considered, the same as cocaine or possession of drug paraphernalia. You cannot have bull hooks because they consider bull hooks to be paraphernalia of animal cruelty. That's what they use, again, to try to get elephants and other larger animals to participate in certain activities that are against their natural behavior. So here on the top right, SeaWorld. People love SeaWorld. People especially love SeaWorld before the Blackfish documentary came out in 2015, 2016, that exposed some of the practices that they were doing, what this means for the dorsal fin to be bent over compared to wild orcas and their very straight up dorsal fins, just a lot of things like that. But nonetheless, people still attend these types of shows, and regardless of beliefs on that, what I'm here to talk about is, again, this is our everyday life, especially living in a place like Florida and Orlando, Central Florida, where we have a lot of tourism for attractions with animals. What is the law behind that? How does that affect the animals? How does that affect the people who are consuming that entertainment? Bottom right here, Tiger King, for anybody who remembers that during COVID, very popular Netflix documentary that came out. One of my very good friends was one of the lead prosecutors involved in the wildlife trafficking charges that were brought against Joe Exotic and Doc Antle and some of the others that were involved in that. But nonetheless, people love roadside zoos. They love the ability to go and bottle feed and hold a baby tiger. People aren't thinking about, how did this baby tiger get here? Is there any legal ramification of this? Hint, hint, just so you know, a lot of places that do that, that's not always milk in the bottle. There's often other sedatives and things that you are feeding the young juvenile animal in order to keep it, again, sedated and not doing its natural behavior, so that you can get a cute picture and use it as a profile picture. And people love that. They love the animals and entertainment. Going back to SeaWorld for a second, it's interesting because a lot of people remember Free Willy, right? The 1993 hit movie where the kid wanted to rescue the killer whale, the orca, from captivity and put it back in the wild. That movie was obviously based on real life because there was a real orca that was based off of, that ended up being transported to Iceland and ultimately tried to be freed, kept getting hit by boats, had to be brought back in, and ended up really dying in captivity, did not end up being free. But even though that movie talked about a lot of the legal things and a lot of the issues going on with the animals, what people remember most from Free Willy was the epic scene at the end with the kid standing on the rocks and the whale jumping over him and Michael Jackson playing, right? That's what they remembered from that. People are not thinking, and that was 1993, people are not thinking about kind of the law behind things when we have animals in entertainment. Other ways that we see animals in entertainment, sports team mascots. Some of our favorite sports teams have live animal mascots. Where I went to NC State, our mascot was Tuffy the Wolf because it's the Wolf Pack, and they had a live domesticated wolf that was specifically bred and held and trained to be the mascot, right? What are there, if any, legal issues involving that? So sports team mascots, again, the zoos, and really animals in Hollywood and movies, all of those things. These are just things, again, in our everyday life here. So how does animal law intersect with the other areas of law that we as attorneys practice? So criminal law, pretty obvious, family law, wills and estate planning, environmental law, consumer protection, and we just talked about entertainment and sports, where animals show up in those spaces, and it's not always the first thought of people practicing in those spaces to think about what are the laws affecting the animals, the welfare of the animals, and how do we care for them. So again, the areas that we usually think about: animal cruelty and neglect, which we'll talk about in just a moment, animals and divorces and custody disputes, family planning, pet trusts, since Florida does allow for pet trusts, and the direct environments to the impact, to direct impact to the environment. I feel like the only time I really saw that being discussed were those oil spills and about marine life. And we had Dawn doing the commercials where they were washing off the baby ducks, and they still have the baby ducks on their bottles, some of their bottles, when you go to the grocery store, because that's what people remember. Oh, yeah, the environment because of the oil spills. But it goes far beyond that. It's not just oil spills and how animals are intertwined with environmental law. And like I said, it impacts all of us every day: the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the products we use, what our straws and our Stanley cups are made of. Where does that come from? How does that impact those animals? How do we leave our footprint on our environment? And what are the corporate, business, and federal regulations that involve animals? So we will start with criminal law and the link. So again, this is kind of the most common thing that people think about when they hear, oh, animal law must be criminal, must be cruelty and neglect. Well, there have been a number of studies done, lots of data gathered on the link between not just animal abuse, but animal abuse and domestic violence, animal abuse and child abuse, animal abuse, and elder abuse. And this is called the link. So that's what this Venn diagram here is for. So this theory of the link between all of these types of violence, like I said, has been backed up in statistics going back to the late 90s. This has been studied for over or about 30 years now. And we are just now seeing a lot more judges, lawyers, advocates, law enforcement agencies really pick up on it and start to educate themselves about it. So in addition to causing pain and suffering to animals themselves, animal abuse and animal abusers is one of the earliest red flags and warning signs of further abuse or further violent acts, right? So people who abuse animals are almost always concurrently committing some other type of abuse, or it is the best predictor that they will commit future abuse on either animals or people. It's often intergenerational, and it's on us as professionals when you spot these certain things to either ask further questions to see what's going on, to continue to educate ourselves, and to educate our community about this issue so that we can help protect our community. So just some quick stats on here. When we're talking about the co-incidence rate for animal abuse, when there's a household and child abuse allegations are occurring, when a child protection or DCF case coordinator responds to a household, this is nationwide, right? So taken from all of the states. When they respond to a household where there has been an allegation of child abuse, if it was just child abuse, emotional or mental, then there is a 60% co-occurrence that there is also animal abuse going on in the household. And if there is a child abuse allegation going on that's physical, then there's 88% co-occurrence of sexual abuse going on with that child. And sexually abused children are 5 times more likely to commit animal abuse. And there's a lot of, again, a lot of data, a lot of psychology and studies behind why that is. 70% is the average nationwide statistic of adult animal abusers who have a history of violence. So people who commit animal abuse nationwide, 70% of them have inflicted some other type of violence on another person or animal. And 71% of women in domestic violence shelters have reported that their abuser either threatened, harmed, or killed an animal as a source of coercion or control to get them to either stay in the relationship or to continue to abuse them. 71% nationwide. School shooters, 50% of school shooters have a history of animal abuse. So 1 in 2 of school shooters have a history of animal abuse. And then when it comes to sex offenders and sexually motivated homicides, almost half had abused animals in childhood or adolescence. And this goes back to, teachers, parents, neighbors, friends, people witnessing, kids and teenagers committing animal abuse and just kind of letting it fly off the radar. That happens quite often and is something that we really have to stop doing. This statistic is quite startling. 92% nationwide. Nationwide, 92% of adult protective services caseworkers report animal neglect coexisting when there is elder abuse or neglect going on, when they're responding to either an elderly person unable to care for themselves, or they were supposed to be in the hands of a caregiver and that person neglected them. And there is also animal neglect going on. The data that I am referring to has all been compiled on the National Link Coalition website. So if you are interested, I highly encourage you to please check out the Link Coalition's website. And I know that we're going to be providing that link as well as some additional resources specific to Florida on here. But I really, really encourage everyone to scroll through this website, look at the statistics, educate yourself, get familiar with the resources about it, because it is very important. And at the toward the end of the presentation, I have some real life case studies that we will go through that illustrate the link in each of these areas. So we will be coming back to this, and I'll talk about specific cases that I have prosecuted that highlight this issue. Let's talk about some of the other intersections with animal law, and we'll circle back to criminal. So with family law and estate planning, you know, there may be people who practice in family. I don't practice in family law. My experience with family law is limited to studying for it for the bar exam and then also going through a divorce in Florida involving pets and children. But other than that, the big thing that I at least teach my students on and that I see when I sit on these committees where we're looking at issues relating to animals and family law have to do with 2 areas. So obviously pet custody, what do we do with the custody of a pet? What do we do with the custody of a pet when there may be some unreported domestic violence or coercion or control going on, which is quite frequent and rampant. I have lots of friends who have been going through divorces, coworkers, people who, the things that you hear that are going on that they say, or the attorneys are saying, or, their soon to be ex is saying about the pets or about them and the coercion, the control. It's troubling, and we shouldn't really just be brushing that off. We should really be digging deeper into that. And then the other area is pet trust, specifically when it comes to things other than dogs and cats, because people have pets other than dogs and cats. So I'll start with the pet trust and then we'll go back. So with pet trust, I have here the statute. So 736, and those of you who practice in this area are probably very familiar with this, that we can create a trust for animals here in Florida. The part that I want to highlight here is about the timeline, right? So it terminates on the death of the last animal or on the death of the last surviving animal if it was created for the care of more than one animal during the settler's lifetime. The last surviving animal could be something very tricky, and I have here, right? So people who own horses, a horse's lifespan can be anywhere from 25 to 40 years. My best friend in North Carolina, we studied animal science together. She has a number of horses, family horses, all of that. And they've got one that I swear has to be pushing 50 years old. So there's obviously exceptions to that, but that's normally the range. But putting a trust together for, 4 or 5 horses that are at various stages of their life, maybe some are young foals, some of them are older, you want to make sure that if you're looking at this here on the death of the last surviving animal, that we are really thinking about what will the care of those horses look like 40 years from now, because we're not just talking about a dog that may be already 9 or 10 years old and we expect to pass in the next decade. We're talking about planning for 4 decades in the future, especially with the change of technology and AI and the cost of care and all of those things. And then what about exotic animals? So I have friends who own tortoises. Tortoises can live to over 100 years old. So how do you put together a trust to care for two or three tortoises that might live centuries from now? Um, you should be consulting with an expert in that area, either an animal behaviorist or a veterinarian, if your client has unique or exotic animals, because it's not going to be the same as putting together a trust for a dog or a cat. And this is an issue that I have seen come up where, people are trying to find a good family law attorney who can do that and who's willing to put in that work to make sure that the trust is adequately written and funded for them. So just keep in mind that people have more than dogs, cats, birds, rabbits, snakes even. Some people have exotic animals that require specific types of care and will require specific types of funding and instructions. And some people have animals that just have longevity of life. And so you want to be thinking about those things and not just about, their dog Rover. So circling back to separation. I put this graphic here because I think it's really interesting. Some of the things in here that I have also noticed just with, friends, colleagues, etc. Um, I had a friend specifically who mentioned that her ex was refusing her to allow her to take the dog to the vet while they were going through their divorce. And that just, again, with the training and the understanding of domestic violence, coercion, control, all of those other things, that's a red flag. You have economic abuse here about the money. So again, just keeping in mind that some of these things may be indicators of something else when you are working in the sphere of family law and you have, clients who are divorcing and their pets involved. It's more than just the custody of the pet, which we know we don't do joint custody. We don't have custody of pets in Florida. It's got to go to somebody generally. I'll talk about that at the end too. However, if you're in a mediation or you're going through your discovery and you're seeing that, some of these things are happening, maybe just ask a few more questions about what's going on, just so that we can make sure that that link and those other things are not, there's not a bigger picture at play here. And again, with the shelter considerations, if you're doing any pro bono work for people in the community, know that, that's a big thing. If they have pets and they're trying to separate or get away from someone who they don't feel comfortable with anymore, that they need resources about where they can safely go with their pets. Otherwise, they're not going to go. Bestie B&B, so BESTY, the letter NB, Bestie B&B is one of the resources like Airbnb, but for victims of domestic violence with pets. So they're one of the partners that have tried to help people in those situations with their pets. And then there's a number of other resources as well that I will share with you, but that's an example of one. Okay. Oh, one more thing. I do want to go back to this. So also with pet trust, you wanna think about natural disaster preparation too. And this is a separate topic that I do train on. What are we going to do with the animals when we need to prepare for either hurricane evacuation, or if there's some other disaster? So that's something else that we need to make sure that we are putting in. If you're working in the sphere with clients and involving their pets, you want to be thinking about those things, especially for these unique animals or exotic animals, because what is the trustee or the administrator supposed to be doing if there is a hurricane coming through that's going to require mandatory evacuation for a week or two? What are we going to do with the tortoises, right? And so just think about those things as well. All right. So let's go on to some of the additional cross sections. So environmental law and consumer protection. We're going to start with consumer protection. It's one of my favorite chapters to when I teach animal law at the law school, and I think the students really like it as well because they get very into it. We take a field trip to Publix, we look at labels, all of those things. But again, like I said, how we get our food, how we get our clothes, our products, it all matters. Most things at least start with the base from a plant or animal or byproduct of the production of an animal. There's a whole long list of things that are animal byproducts that are quite common things that we don't even think about. Um, One of the things on that list, including, which I will send to you, including like batteries, for example, parts of batteries are animal byproducts. So a lot of things, if we didn't have the production of animals the way that we did, we wouldn't have 90% of the things that we use in our day-to-day lives. But consumers, us as people who are paying money for these things, we expect that we are not being misled. However, a lot of products are mislabeled, and they are misleading to consumers. So this is an area of law that, I find fascinating. I think we need a lot more oversight in, just my personal opinion. I think we need a lot more oversight in, but it's interesting to look at what the laws and regulations are compared to what people as individuals expect them to be, and what do we as attorneys do about that. And a lot of people think, I think I'm doing the right thing. I'm buying the green and brown label that says that it's humane. I feel like I'm trying to do the right thing, but really, are they making a difference, or are they just putting more money in the pocket of the manufacturer? So some of the labels here on the screen, I'll go through. Um, no added hormones, for example, no added hormones. We see this a lot. Well, hormones have been illegal in all poultry and all swine. So any of your chicken, turkey, duck, pork, etc. It's been illegal to give hormones to those animals for decades. It is not illegal to give growth hormones to certain cattle to increase milk production or muscle mass production in beef. However, if you're going to give the hormones to them, then it has to be labeled, raised with, or added, whatever. It's the recombinant bovine growth hormone that is one of the more popular ones. And the way that I like to explain this is it's similar to either birth control or like melatonin. Our bodies naturally produce melatonin. However, sometimes when you're feeling like restless and you can't sleep and you need a little extra boost to increase the amount that you have in your body, maybe you take a melatonin to help you sleep. You're just putting in your body something your body already produces and you just want more of it. So that's kind of what that specific hormone only for beef and dairy does. It just increases what they already have going on so that they can do it faster. But it's not like they're being injected with other unnatural or things that are not naturally produced in their body. So I want to be very clear about that. The reason why is because you'll see these labels. If I see no added hormones on a pack of chicken, I'm immediately suspicious of that company because you already cannot give hormones to the chicken. If I see no added hormones to a pack of bacon, I'm suspicious of that company because it's illegal for you to give them hormones to begin with. So why do you feel the need to label the package no added hormones? Again, it's so that they can charge the extra dollar, so you'll pay extra so that you will feel better about not buying pork with hormones in it, even though none of the pork should have hormones in it, if that makes sense. Certified humane here, Food Alliance certified, American Humane certified. These labels mean nothing. They are not regulated by the FDA or the USDA. What they are they are pay to play labels. So the Food Alliance organization will allow manufacturers to pay a fee in order to go through their certification process and then be able to use that label on the food. American Humane Certified, same thing. Egg Producers United, it's the same thing. These are third-party organizations, corporations that have these independent processes separate from the FDA and the USDA, where essentially Tyson, Butterball, whoever can simply just pay the fee to be a member of those and then put the label on their product to say that it is this extra certification. But that is not regulated by our government, our laws, or our regulations. That is a pay-to-play label. Natural, okay. Natural also means nothing. Natural is not regulated by the FDA or the USDA. I can say that anything that I create is 100% natural, and it doesn't matter because there is no regulation to the use of that word or that label. The only ones that really carry any meaning are if they are the USDA labels. Okay, and anything that specifically says USDA or FDA, because those are the only legal regulations that we have in the United States when it comes to our food products, and any of our other products that we use, like makeup or hygiene products. Okay, so this is a picture of free range chickens. All right, so these are free range chickens, and the USDA definition and the FDA definition of free range chickens just means that they have to have access to food, water, and sunlight during their egg laying cycle. So free range chickens may actually never be outside. They just have to have access to sunlight. So what you will see in some of these large animal feed operations, they're called CAFOs, concentrated animal feed operations, is a picture like this, where there might be some windows, or there might be a large garage style door that opens, maybe part way, or maybe things similar to like doggy doors where they can go out on like a little patio or something. But just because something is labeled free range, people get in their mind this picture of chickens running on the pasture on the rolling green hills with the red barn in the background, and that is not necessarily the case. Certainly, there are some producers where that is the case, where they, maybe have a smaller family farm operation where their chickens do run around on the pasture. But Tyson, some of your large manufacturers, I believe this is a picture from Tyson, that is not what is going on most of the time. However, because they have access to sunlight during their egg laying cycle, and again, so it's not all the time, it's only during the egg laying cycles when they have to give it to them, and they are not in a cage, they can smack that label on the eggs that are likely brown, and likely a brown carton, again, all marketing for the consumer, that says free range. Now, whether or not that is, an issue for us as attorneys, that we feel like people are being misled, it's probably a conversation for a different day. Again, and cage-free chickens just mean they're not in a battery cage, which is the cages that are stacked on top of each other. They don't have to have access to the outdoors at all. So they just cannot be in a cage, but there's no amount of space requirement or anything like that. So just because you're buying cage-free eggs, again, that doesn't mean that they're outside. In fact, they're most likely inside still, just not in a cage. And usually the space that they have is about a piece of paper. To move around on. Okay. So here's a picture of some beef cattle here, or some cows, and then we have our Holstein cows here. As a side note, when you see the black and white cow, the Holstein cow, there's called Holstein cows, the dairy cows, the Chick-fil-A mascot. They are largely used for milk production. So it's just my own personal, I get very irritated by the Chick-fil-A mascot because it's a dairy cow. Anyway. So this is an example of grass-fed cows. So if you see grass-fed beef, or, cows grass-fed dairy that comes from grass-fed cows, again, they can still be inside and they're just fed the grass. They're fed the hay. That doesn't mean that they are outside on the pasture. So grass-fed just refers to what they are fed, not where they are fed. If you had pasture-raised beef, that just refers to where they are fed, not what they are fed. So I can have cows out on pasture and still just dump buckets of grain. Okay, so just because they are outside doesn't mean that that's all that they're eating is grass. They can still be grain-fed just outside on the pasture, which could be dirt or sand. If they are grass-fed, again, it doesn't mean that the cows are running around, rolling around on the green grass. They are in a barn, most likely, or in one of these feed operations, most likely, just being fed piles of grass or hay. They're not necessarily outside. Okay, so the difference in the definitions and the labels certainly matter. Okay, so now let's talk about organic. All right, so some of the organic labels explained here. 100% organic and regular organic use the same seal. You might see the USDA organic seal in different colors. It might be in black, it might be in red, it might be in green, it might be in white, it might be in brown. The color doesn't matter. The color is simply the manufacturer being allowed to choose from a range of approved colors so that it can match the marketing colors on the packaging. So if I'm Tyson and I have a yellow and red bag, maybe I don't want to put the brown USDA label on there. Maybe I want the black one, it'll match better. But the color of the actual USDA seal does not matter. It will say USDA organic and that's it. Okay, so you can't differentiate between 100% organic and regular organic because it's the same seal. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's up to you. The difference though is that regular organic means that it is 95% certified organic ingredients. So you can still have up to 5% inorganic ingredients in a product and call it organic. It's only 100% organic if everything in there is 100% certified organic. But again, the distinction here, unsure. Made with organic is 70% of ingredients. So you can have up to 30% inorganic ingredients, right? And if you want to use the label organic ingredients, there's no specific percentage of what has to be considered. So if you get a can of salsa and it says, Publix salsa, Totitos salsa, organic tomatoes, there's really there's nothing there, and you're not going to see the seal on it. There's no regulation as to what that means. Now, if it is Totitos salsa and on the ingredient label it says made with organic tomatoes, then you still can't use the seal, but at least if they say made with organic, at least 70% of the tomatoes themselves are organic that they use to crush up in the salsa. So it's very convoluted as far as the organic labels. This is directly from the USDA's website themselves, and I've done a ton of research on this issue with organic. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Who's using it? Who's regulating it? But it's a topic that I could go on for hours and days about, but just to give you kind of a brief overview, when we're talking about animal law and about consumer protection, these are one of the biggest things that I see, either complaints about or people just really not understanding. So in the top right corner here, I have this is a concentrated animal feed operation, also called a CAFO. So I'll refer to it as a CAFO. And this is pork. Okay, so these are swine, these are pigs in here, and what we usually call either sow stalls or gestational crates if they're pregnant. So most female pig sows will stay in these crates for their lifetime. They will be born in these crates and they will stay in these crates. Once they become pregnant, they're moved to gestational crates. And then once they are born, when they have their piglets with them, they have a little bit larger of a crate where the piglets can be on one side, move around to nurse, but the mom herself, the sow, still has to be in the main part of the crate. And then they die, and then they're sent off to slaughter. So this is what the inside of a pork operation would look like, or a swine farm. This is kind of an aerial view here in the bottom left of a CAFO. And as you can see, there are just lots of rows of these big warehouses that are the barns, even though the packaging will have the red barn with the white doors and the big X on it. These are the barns. And then you'll have these waste ponds that are attached to them, because as you can imagine, like I put this picture here, and I worked on NC State swine farm when I was in college. It was one of our requirements. We had to rotate through all the farms. And basically, yes, they do have to defecate and urinate, and there's other bodily fluids that are going on. And so you just take a hose and you spray it down. It goes through these crates, through a pipe system out to the septic pond here. So all of the waste gathers, and then what do we do with the waste? It can't just stay there forever. It can't overflow into our water table. But there's something called manure irrigation. And that is where you take the waste, you pipe it through a little machine, and then you spray other crops. So other crops that might be growing as part of the agricultural setup here. Maybe they have herbs growing, or peanuts or other things, then you're going to spray it. A lot of people who have been in rural areas or maybe been through farms and you've seen these big sprayers, there's been a lot of, litigation and motions moving forward to try to get people to stop manure irrigation because of the environmental law impacts and the health impacts on neighboring communities. However, when you see these sprayers, it's not water, okay? It's usually a formula containing manure in it. So close your windows when you drive past. But the production of meat and animal products certainly affects our environment because the waste doesn't just go away. The gases that cows and other animals emit, the methane goes into the atmosphere. How are we regulating that? What is the law about that? And what about the animals themselves and their welfare? So this is another area where animal law intersects. So, what are some ways that you can be engaged? So, legislation and lobbying, certainly one. Here in Florida, we saw that with in the criminal law sphere with Trooper's Law, Dexter's Law. Most recently, that was this year, where we had the dog that was tied up on either I-4, I-75 near Tampa, and he was during the hurricane, and he was rescued. And so now we have that, we have a new felony where it is unlawful and there's an enhancement to abandon animals during a natural disaster or a state of emergency. So that came from that. Dexter's Law, where we now have an increase on our criminal punishment code score sheet, an enhancement for that type of torture. Until 2022, because I did sex crimes for a while, and when I was in sex crimes, bestiality or sexual activity with animals was only a misdemeanor in Florida. And thanks to legislation and lobbying, that is now a felony. As of, I think it was 2022, it was changed. Again, we talked about the circus, the advocacy, and the legislation and lobbying to either outlaw specific things that we know people are using, such as the bull hooks, or, filing those lawsuits, the violations of the Animal Welfare Act, all of those other things, to change the behaviors in the circus. Also with Tiger King and other things, we now have wildlife trafficking added to our statutes and added to some states like RICO predicates. Obviously, volunteering your time is important. It's more than just the animal shelter. The local animal shelter is certainly thankful for your donations and your time and all of that. Fostering is really, really important if you are an animal lover and you want to do that. But also, as lawyers and as people in the legal profession, there are tons of animal advocacy organizations that need volunteers to help with amicus briefs, to help with advocacy, writing memos, doing research on the laws across our nation worldwide. The Animal Legal Defense Fund and Animal Welfare Institute, AWI and ALDF, they always are looking for people who are attorneys who are passionate about this area to help them with writing on briefs, doing research, advocating, doing trainings, helping with conferences, mentoring other young lawyers, etc. And then here in Florida, we have the animal law section of the Florida Bar, which you could join and volunteer your time. And then, of course, educate yourself, educate people around you. Most of my students, every week, they would come to class, they'd be like, I went to Trader Joe's and I asked the guy because you told us that Aldi and Trader Joe's are the same thing. They are. Aldi owns Trader Joe's, and we were wondering why things were so much cheaper. And the guy, like, it's so interesting when people have that power of education and knowing where things are coming from and what's actually going on behind the scenes, and can ask the pertinent questions so that we can have actual change, and people can just be more educated about where they're spending their money, what they're putting in their bodies, and how they're helping our other living beings that, we are sharing this earth with. So I have a few examples, case examples, just to give you like some overlying facts and then the outcome of those. And then that should take us right to the Q&A. So Buddy was a case that I prosecuted. Buddy was the name of the dog, and the defendant, who was convicted after trial, was convicted of aggravated animal cruelty because and another trigger warning, some of the facts are graphic. He slit his dog's neck. He slit Buddy's neck, wrapped him up in a rug, drug him out back, and just kind of left him there. During the investigation on Buddy's murder, we also discovered that the defendant had confessed to his family in Utah and to his church pastor and the other members of the church he was involved in, that he had been molesting some of the younger females in his family, some of his nieces and his daughters, for a very long time because he said it was because God told him to, or that it was okay, or whatever. But nevertheless, this was a great example of the link between animal abuse and child molestation, which we know is a very prominent link. Unfortunately, we were unable to, the state of Utah was quite uncooperative with that investigation, and the child victims, of course, were not comfortable coming forward while he was out of custody until we got our conviction on our case. So those allegations, despite his confession, we have corpus and we have all these other legal issues. We couldn't really go forward on those. And so really all we could get him on was the animal cruelty. He was sentenced to a term, and he was incarcerated for that. And the judge put a lot of parameters on him upon his release. However, it's really just a good thing to show that had we not put the time and energy into trying to investigate and prove a very difficult circumstantial evidence case about Buddy's murder, we would have never discovered these other issues with the child abuse, even though we know there was a link there. And this guy had no prior history, right? No convictions, nothing anybody was aware of. However, had openly admitted, and his pastor had admitted he had been telling him that he was doing these things for a year. We also had on the side, we had to litigate clergy pendant privilege. It was this whole other thing, but that case was a great example of that. Tina is a little Chihuahua, and her case was a great example of the link between animal abuse and domestic violence. Tina's owner was also a victim of domestic violence. Her boyfriend would put Tina, the Chihuahua, in the microwave, and he would start the microwave and send a video to his girlfriend to say, if you don't come home right now from work and do X, Y, and Z, like, Tina's gonna get blown up in the microwave. And he would send her videos of the dog in the microwave, literally spinning around on the plate. He would try to drown her, again, send her pictures and videos. He would beat the dog and torture the dog as a use of coercion and control over the human victim. Again, no prior history, had not been convicted of anything yet, but was committing more and more violent acts on the animal. And then when she finally was able to break away and take Tina to the vet for one of the instances where she was concerned if she was going to survive, they had to keep Tina at the vet for medical treatment. And when she went back home, that's when he turned his violence on her. And so at trial, unfortunately, he was not convicted of the domestic violence on the human. And again, it's because unfortunately, a lot of people don't believe victims, but people will convict for animals. And so, had we not, again, gone after that link, then he might not have ever been held accountable for anything. John Doe is a good case about elder abuse. This was one we see a lot of this with hoarding, and there is a ton of hoarding in Central Florida. So they responded to a house where there was a neighbor concerned about hoarding, boxes stacked, odor of ammonia. As soon as you are on the property, you can smell the ammonia, which is always a bad sign. They recovered over 100 animals from the house, but while they were there, they also noticed chains on the refrigerator and on the bedroom door, like lock chains. And instead of just brushing that off and being like, oh, I don't know, thanks to the training on the link, they were able to ask a few more questions and do a deeper investigation, and found out that the owner of the property was keeping her elderly father in the conditions of that house as well, and using that and abusing him and exploiting him for financial gain and other things. And so it was preventing him from leaving the house, from getting any food, had everything locked up, and then just in those very deplorable conditions. And then my divorce, yay, fun thing. So, my ex-husband and I had two dogs while we were together, and understanding that Florida doesn't really recognize joint custody, we use it as an opportunity in one of our sections where it's like that other section on the marital settlement agreement to basically negotiate a joint custody agreement of the dogs, where we would exchange whoever didn't have our son would then take the dogs and vice versa. And sometimes we would work it out where one person would have everybody depending on the schedule. So and again, understanding it's a little bit different. We had a very amicable agreement, separation, those types of things. And I thought it was interesting because it's a debate that I have with my students, like, well, is that technically legal? Could the judge enforce it? Could you hold him in contempt if he didn't agree or if you didn't agree and vice versa? And all very interesting questions, but nevertheless, something that, the judge did grant and that we have going on right now. So I think I'm hopefully on time. I appreciate you all listening to this very brief overview of all of the areas where animal law intersects, and hopefully you learned something new. With that, I'll take questions if we have time for questions, if there
Yeah,
are
we have
any.
a few minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the link to the materials. This will all be included in the email, and the YouTube description as well. I'm also going to read the CLE code out loud. It is 2513308 N as in Nancy. I will drop it in the chat as well, just to make sure people have it. I've been dropping a lot of resources, Lauren, while you were talking. Every time you mentioned the
Okay.
link, I've been dropping them into the chat. So I have all of those things compiled to be sent out in that email that goes out as well. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the chat, the Q&A. You can also raise your hand, and I can try to bring you off mute if that makes it a little bit easier. So I have to say, I had no idea that there was such a thing as a trust for pets. So
Oh
now I
yeah,
know. I totally learned something new today. So,
awesome.
right. Not sure if we have any questions. One that stood out for me specifically was the link between domestic violence and animal abuse. I was curious if you've ever done any outreach with animal shelters or even with vets, just to let them know kind of the other way around, like, hey, this is the link and here's how to connect with resources. Or you can connect the owners with the resources, like legal aid and DV shelters.
Yeah, and it's called Victim to Verdict. They're an organization that specifically targets veterinarians to try to train them better on animal abuse, but we've been also pushing the link out through that. It's really hard to get veterinarians in general on board with anything because I think they're so paranoid about like civil discovery or being sued or them, getting they don't really like to get involved. So it's very difficult, but it's something that's certainly been on the rise with our trainings. And that particular organization has been really awesome and working specifically with veterinarians so that they can help identify it. If somebody brings a dog in and maybe the story of how the dog got injured isn't quite adding up, to basically just here's a few extra questions that you can ask, the prompt here so you can call, here are the resources. So we have been working exactly on that, but I'll tell you, it is hard. It's hard to get them involved. Oh, I do see a question. Could you please restate what you stated concerning Trader Joe's? So there's a number of manufacturers and companies that have parent companies and sub companies, and a lot of them are the same. So Aldi, the Aldi is the parent company. Aldi owns Trader Joe's. So a lot of the things that you will see, and I do this in my class where I have the big chart of all of them, is they obviously it's marketing. Again, it's to the consumer. It's trying to make the consumer believe that, hey, this product or this thing is better, usually dropped in a market where they know that people will pay more for a specific thing with a specific name attached to it. It's just like name brand versus generic drugs. They're chemically identical, but people, for whatever reason, want to pay more to get Tylenol versus CVS acetaminophen. It's the same thing. So Trader Joe's carries a lot of things that are identical to Aldi, but it's a third of the price at Aldi, and Aldi is actually the parent company that owns Trader Joe's. They're just getting more money.
So, they're
Aldi
kind of the
lover
Aldi brother
forever.
for you.
Yes, we love Aldi. We're Aldi household.
All right, so I don't see any other questions, and we're almost at time. So I want to take this
Yep.
opportunity to thank you, Lauren, for an amazing presentation. I learned a lot. I know our audience learned a lot. Animal law is definitely everywhere. So thank you again for taking your time. And thank you everybody that joined us here today. If you're listening to this because you registered, I'm going to send out an email within 24 hours from Zoom with all the recording, the materials, and it will also be posted on YouTube. So thank you again, Lauren, and everybody that joined us, and have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you so much. You too.